The rain fell softly against the cracked windows of a small apartment in the older part of the city. Inside, Victoria sat at a narrow wooden desk cluttered with scattered papers, half-empty coffee mugs, and a laptop that hummed like it had been working just as long as she had. She rubbed her tired eyes and leaned back in her chair. Across the room, Michael Anderson stood by the window, staring down at the dimly lit streets below. Cars rolled through shallow puddles. Neon lights flickered from convenience stores. Somewhere in the distance, a train rumbled across iron tracks. From up here, the city looked powerful, but from inside their tiny apartment, it felt distant, almost unreachable. A world built for other people, not them. "Did you finish the projections?" Michael asked without turning around. Victoria stretched her arms above her head. "You mean the projections for the company that doesn't technically exist yet?" Michael smiled faintly. Victoria rotated the laptop toward him. "Well," she said, "good news." Michael walked over slowly. "You're smiling," he said. "That means either we're rich already, or you're about to make me work all night." Victoria laughed. "Definitely the second one." Michael leaned over the desk and studied the spreadsheet glowing on the screen. Revenue projections, operational strategy, investment timelines, everything laid out with careful detail. "You did all this tonight?" he asked quietly. Victoria shrugged casually. "You had the idea," she said. "I just organized it." Michael shook his head. "This is way more than organizing." Victoria leaned back again. "You're overthinking it." Michael crossed his arms. "You're the only person who actually believes this business could work." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "That's not true." "Oh, really?" he said. "Who else believes it?" Victoria smiled gently. "You." Michael let out a tired laugh. "Some days." Victoria stood up and walked toward the small kitchen corner of the apartment. The smell of instant noodles lingered in the air. Another glamorous dinner. "You know what investors are going to ask tomorrow," she said. Michael sighed. "Money." "Exactly." Victoria leaned against the counter. "If we want them to believe in this company, we need to show them we believe in it first." Michael frowned slightly. "And how do we do that?" Victoria walked back to the desk and opened a drawer. Inside was a small envelope. She placed it carefully on the table. Michael stared at it. "What's that?" "My savings." Michael blinked. "How much?" $10,000. Michael immediately shook his head. "No." Victoria folded her arms. "What do you mean, no?" "You've been saving that for years," he said. Victoria nodded. "Yes." "You can't just give it to me." Victoria smiled softly. "I'm not giving it to you." She gently pushed the envelope closer to him. "I'm investing in us." The room went silent. Outside, tires splashed through rainwater on the street. Michael stared at the envelope like it weighed 100 pounds. "You trust me that much?" he asked quietly. Victoria didn't hesitate. "More than you trust yourself." Michael slowly picked up the envelope. For a moment, he looked like he might cry. "I promise," he said softly, "I won't waste this." Victoria smiled warmly. "I know." That night, they stayed awake until nearly 3 in the morning, practicing the presentation, fixing slides, arguing about strategy, dreaming about a future that felt impossibly far away. At one point, Michael leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. "Do you ever think about what life will be like if this works?" he asked. Victoria laughed. "You mean besides finally being able to afford decent coffee?" "I'm serious." "So am I." Michael turned toward her. "I mean if it really works," he said. "Like, big." Victoria thought for a moment. Then she answered quietly. "I just want a life where we're not constantly worried about surviving." Michael studied her face. "You deserve more than that." Victoria walked to the window and stood beside him. "Maybe," she said softly. Then she looked out at the glowing skyline. "But I'd rather build something meaningful with someone I love than live in luxury with someone who doesn't care." Michael didn't respond, but the way he squeezed her hand felt like a promise neither of them knew would one day break. Across the city, in glass towers touching the clouds, wealthy executives celebrated million-dollar deals over champagne. That world felt impossibly far away. But Victoria believed something powerful. Dreams didn't belong only to the rich. Sometimes they started in small apartments with broken windows, cheap noodles, and two stubborn people who believed in each other. At exactly 2:47 a.m., Michael closed the laptop. "We're ready." Victoria stretched and yawned. Finally, Michael walked back to the window. The rain had stopped. Streetlights shimmered across the wet pavement. Tomorrow could change everything, he said. Victoria stepped beside him and slipped her hand into his. Then let's make sure it does. They stood there quietly, watching the sleeping city. Neither of them knew that one day Michael Anderson would stand in a penthouse overlooking that same skyline, while Victoria would walk away from it with a broken heart and a betrayal she never imagined. Have you ever believed in someone so deeply that you were willing to risk everything for their dream? Share your thoughts in the comments section. The investor meeting took place in a building that felt far too elegant for people like Victoria and Michael. Glass walls, polished marble floors, receptionists who looked like they belonged on magazine covers. Victoria sat beside Michael in the waiting area, holding a tablet with their presentation open. Her leg bounced nervously. Michael noticed. "Relax," he whispered. Victoria looked at him. "That's easy for you to say. You're not the one who spent 3 nights calculating those numbers." Michael chuckled quietly. True. Across from them, 2 men in tailored suits were talking softly. One of them occasionally glanced toward Michael. Victoria leaned closer. "I think they're judging us," she whispered. Michael smiled. "They're investors. Judging people is their full-time job." Victoria sighed. "Great." A few minutes later, a tall woman stepped out of a conference room. "Michael Anderson?" Michael stood up immediately. "That's me." She smiled politely. "They're ready for you." Michael looked down at Victoria. "You coming?" Victoria shook her head. "You should do this one." Michael frowned. "Why?" Victoria gave him a confident smile. "Because it's your dream." Michael hesitated for a moment. Then he nodded. "Okay." He leaned closer to her before walking away. "If I pass out in there, come rescue me." Victoria laughed. "Deal." Michael walked into the conference room. The door closed, and Victoria was left alone with her thoughts. She stared down at the tablet screen. Every number represented a risk. Every projection represented a dream. Their dream. For a moment, doubt crept into her mind. What if the investors laughed? What if they said no? What if everything they had sacrificed meant nothing? She shook her head quickly. No. Michael believed in this, and she believed in Michael. That had always been enough. Inside the conference room, 5 investors sat around a long table. Michael stood at the front, gripping the remote for the presentation screen. His heart pounded. But when he began speaking, something changed. Confidence replaced fear. His voice became steady. His ideas became powerful. Slide after slide revealed the potential of the company. Market gaps, growth strategies, technology advantages. By the time he finished, the room had fallen silent. One of the investors leaned back in his chair. "You built this plan yourself?" he asked. Michael hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then he nodded. "Yes." Another investor looked through the documents. "These numbers are impressive." Michael smiled politely. "Thank you." The first investor folded his hands. "Mr. Anderson, I believe your company has potential." Michael felt his chest tighten. "But ideas alone are not enough," the man continued. Michael nodded. "I understand." The investor glanced at the others. Then he said something that would change everything. "We're willing to fund your startup." Michael froze. "For how much?" he asked. The investor smiled slightly. $2 million. For a moment, Michael couldn't breathe. $2 million. It was more money than he had ever imagined having. "We would take 30% equity," the investor added. Michael nodded quickly. "That's reasonable." The investors stood up. "Congratulations, Mr. Anderson." They shook his hand. Just like that, his life had changed. Outside the conference room, Victoria sat scrolling through the presentation again. The door suddenly opened. Michael walked out slowly. Victoria immediately stood. "Well?" she asked. Michael didn't speak. Victoria frowned. "That bad?" Michael suddenly pulled her into a hug. "We got it," he whispered. Victoria froze. Then she pulled back. "Wait, what?" "They're investing." Victoria blinked. "How much?" Michael grinned. $2 million. Victoria gasped. For a moment, she looked like she might cry. Then she laughed. "I knew it," she said. Michael looked surprised. "You knew?" Victoria shrugged. "Of course." Michael shook his head. "You're unbelievable." Victoria smiled. "Good unbelievable or crazy unbelievable?" Michael laughed. "Both." They walked outside the building together. The sun had broken through the clouds. Cars moved through the busy streets. The world suddenly looked different, larger, brighter, full of possibilities. Michael stopped walking. Victoria turned. "What?" Michael took a deep breath. "Victoria, we're actually going to build this." Victoria nodded. "I told you." Michael looked at her with a strange intensity. You believed in me when no one else did. Victoria shrugged. That's what partners do. Michael reached into his pocket. Victoria frowned. What are you doing? Michael pulled out a small ring box. Victoria froze. Michael, that he opened it. Inside was a simple silver ring. I know it's not expensive, he said quietly, but I wanted to ask you something before our lives change. Victoria's heart raced. Michael knelt down right there on the sidewalk. Victoria, he said softly, will you marry me? Victoria stared at him. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Tears filled her eyes. Yes, she whispered. Michael slipped the ring onto her finger. People walking by clapped softly. Victoria laughed through tears. I can't believe you just did that in public. Michael stood up. I wanted the world to know. Victoria hugged him tightly. At that moment, everything felt perfect. Love, hope, success. Their future looked unstoppable. Years later, Victoria would remember that moment over and over again. The ring, the sunlight, the way Michael looked at her. She would remember it because it was the last time she truly believed nothing could break them. The company grew faster than anyone expected. Within a year, they moved into a small office. Within 2 years, they had dozens of employees. Within 3 years, the company was worth millions. Michael Anderson became known as one of the most promising young entrepreneurs in the city. Interviews, business magazines, networking events. Victoria watched it all with pride. But slowly, something began to change. Michael started coming home later. He attended more elite events, more meetings, more parties. He began wearing suits that cost more than their old rent. Victoria noticed something else too. The people around him were different now. Powerful investors, ambitious executives, people who spoke about success like it was the only thing that mattered. One night, Victoria waited in their new apartment. Dinner sat cold on the table. The clock read 11:48 p.m. Michael finally walked in. You're late, she said softly. Michael loosened his tie. Investor dinner. Victoria nodded. You didn't answer my messages. I was busy. Victoria studied his face. Something about him felt distant. Are you okay? She asked. Michael sighed. I'm just tired. Victoria walked over and hugged him. Michael hugged her back, but something about the embrace felt different, shorter, colder. Victoria pulled away slightly. Do you remember the night we got the investment? She asked. Michael nodded. Of course. Victoria smiled faintly. That was the happiest day of my life. Michael didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked to the window and looked out over the city. The skyline glowed brighter than ever, but the silence between them had quietly begun to grow. Victoria looked down at the ring on her finger, the same simple ring Michael had given her on the sidewalk. At the time, it meant everything. She didn't know that someday, Michael Anderson would become so powerful that he would start believing he no longer needed the woman who helped him rise. 3 years earlier, Michael Anderson and Victoria had celebrated success with cheap pizza on the floor of their first office. Now Michael stood inside a ballroom filled with crystal chandeliers, expensive wine, and conversations worth millions. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne. Michael took a glass absent-mindedly. Across the room, powerful investors laughed loudly, discussing acquisitions and mergers as casually as people talked about the weather. This was the world Michael now belonged to, or at least, the world he was trying to belong to. Michael Anderson. Michael turned as a tall man approached him with a confident smile. Mr. Langford, Michael said politely. Richard Langford was one of the most influential investors in the city. Older, wealthy, ruthlessly strategic. He shook Michael's hand firmly. I heard your company just secured another round of funding. Michael nodded. Yes, we did. Langford smiled. Impressive growth for such a young CEO. Michael appreciated the compliment, but he also knew compliments from men like Langford always came with expectations. You're building something powerful, Langford continued. Michael nodded again. That's the goal. Langford glanced around the room. Then he leaned slightly closer. You know the difference between people who build companies and people who build empires. Michael raised an eyebrow. What's that? Langford smiled slightly. Sacrifice. Michael said nothing. Langford continued. Empire builders remove distractions. Michael frowned slightly. Distractions? Langford took a slow sip of champagne. Emotions. Attachments. People who belong to your past instead of your future. Michael understood the implication, and he didn't like it. My fiancée has been with me since the beginning, Michael said calmly. Langford nodded slowly. Yes, I've heard that. His voice remained polite, but his next words carried weight. Just remember something, Michael. Langford leaned closer. The higher you climb, the fewer people can climb with you. Michael didn't respond. Langford gave him a friendly pat on the shoulder. Enjoy the party. Then he walked away. Michael stared into his champagne glass. For a moment, the room suddenly felt louder, more chaotic. The music, the laughter, the conversations about wealth. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. Victoria, are you coming home soon? Michael stared at the message. For a moment, he remembered something simple. Their tiny apartment, late nights working together, Victoria laughing while eating instant noodles. Back then, everything felt clear, simple. Now everything felt complicated. Michael typed a reply. Still at the event. Don't wait up. He hesitated. Then he pressed send. Across the city, Victoria sat alone at the dining table. 2 plates sat on the table, one untouched. She looked at her phone. Michael's message appeared. She sighed quietly. Okay, she whispered to herself. The apartment they now lived in was beautiful. Huge windows, modern furniture, expensive artwork Michael had insisted on buying. But somehow, it felt lonelier than their old place. Victoria stood up and carried the food back into the kitchen. As she washed the plates, she glanced at the small silver ring on her finger. The ring from the day everything began. She smiled faintly. Things are just busy right now, she said softly. She believed that. Or at least she wanted to. Weeks passed. Michael's schedule became even more demanding. Investor meetings, interviews, corporate dinners, networking events. Victoria tried to stay supportive. She told herself success required sacrifice. But something else had started to change. Michael had started listening more to people like Richard Langford. One afternoon, Michael sat in Langford's massive office overlooking the city skyline. Langford poured 2 glasses of whiskey. You're doing well, Michael, he said. Michael nodded. Thank you. Langford leaned back in his chair. But success is fragile. Michael frowned slightly. What do you mean? Langford gestured toward the city outside. Half the companies you see out there will collapse within 10 years. Michael took a sip of whiskey, and the other half. Langford smiled. They make ruthless decisions. Michael knew exactly what Langford meant. You still live with your fiancée, right? Langford asked casually. Yes. Langford nodded. Interesting. Michael frowned. What's interesting about that? Langford shrugged. Nothing. I just find it unusual. Why? Langford smiled. Most CEOs in your position are more strategic with their relationships. Michael set the glass down. My relationship isn't a strategy. Langford leaned forward slightly. Exactly. The room fell silent. Michael felt uncomfortable. Langford spoke again. Michael, you're entering a world where perception matters. Michael crossed his arms. Victoria helped build this company. Langford nodded. I'm sure she did. Then he added calmly. But the board doesn't see it that way. Michael looked up. What do you mean? Langford tapped the desk lightly. The board sees a brilliant CEO. Michael waited. They also see a woman with no corporate experience living in your penthouse. Michael's jaw tightened. Langford leaned back. I'm just telling you what they say privately. Michael said nothing, but the words planted a dangerous seed. That night, Michael returned home late again. Victoria was sitting on the couch reading. She looked up and smiled. You're home. Michael nodded. Long day. Victoria closed her book. I figured. Michael walked toward the kitchen. Victoria studied him carefully. You've been quiet lately, she said. Michael poured himself water. I'm just tired. Victoria stood up and walked closer. Is something wrong? Michael hesitated. Then he shook his head. No. Victoria looked unconvinced. You know you can talk to me. Michael avoided her eyes. I know. Victoria took his hand gently. Michael, we built this together. Michael slowly pulled his hand away. Things are different now. Victoria blinked. What does that mean? Michael sighed. Victoria, the company is growing faster than we expected. Yes, and that means expectations are different. Victoria frowned. I don't understand. Michael ran a hand through his hair. The board is watching everything. Victoria looked confused. Okay. Michael hesitated before speaking again. They think, maybe you shouldn't be so involved. Victoria stared at him. I'm not involved in the company anymore. I know. Then what's the problem? Michael looked uncomfortable. They think. It affects perception. Victoria's voice dropped slightly. Perception of what? Michael didn't answer immediately. Victoria slowly understood. They think I don't belong in your world anymore. Michael looked away. That's not what I said. But it's what you meant. The room became painfully quiet. Victoria's chest tightened. Michael, I believed in you when you had nothing. Michael rubbed his forehead. I know. You used my savings to start this company. I know. Then why does it suddenly feel like I'm the one who doesn't belong? Michael looked at her, and for a moment, guilt flashed across his face, but pride quickly replaced it. I'm just trying to protect the company. Victoria's voice cracked slightly. And what about us? Michael didn't answer. If success forced you to choose between love and ambition, what would you choose? Share your thoughts and comment below. Victoria slowly sat down. The distance between them felt enormous now. Michael stared out the window again. The same city skyline they once dreamed about together. But tonight, something invisible had shifted. The first real crack had appeared. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both felt it. Michael was beginning to believe the world he had entered required a different version of himself. And Victoria was beginning to realize that the man she believed in might be slowly disappearing. The invitation arrived in a thick black envelope. Victoria found it on the marble kitchen counter one morning. She stared at the gold lettering on the front. Anderson Technologies Annual Investor Gala. Location: the Grand Meridian Hotel. Formal attire required. Victoria ran her fingers across the smooth paper. This was Michael's biggest corporate event yet. Hundreds of investors, executives, media representatives. The entire business world Michael had worked so hard to enter. Michael walked into the kitchen just as Victoria opened the envelope. You got the invitation, he said. Victoria looked up. Yes. Michael poured himself coffee. The board insisted we host a gala this year. Victoria nodded slowly. That's exciting. Michael watched her carefully. You'll come with me, right? Victoria blinked. Of course. Michael hesitated. It's just a very formal event. Victoria smiled slightly. I can handle formal. Michael quickly looked away. I know. But Victoria heard the hesitation in his voice, and it hurt more than she expected. The night of the gala arrived. The Grand Meridian Hotel glittered like a palace. Crystal lights sparkled above a massive ballroom. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Inside, wealthy guests laughed over champagne and soft jazz music. Michael stood near the entrance greeting investors. He looked different tonight. Perfectly tailored black suit, confident posture, the image of a powerful CEO. Michael. Richard Langford approached with a pleased smile. This event is impressive, Langford said. Michael nodded politely. Thank you. Langford scanned the room. Where's your fiancée? Michael hesitated slightly. She'll be here soon. Right then, the ballroom doors opened again. Victoria stepped inside. And for a moment, the entire room seemed to pause. She wore a deep blue evening gown that shimmered softly under the lights. Her hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders. Elegant, natural, beautiful in a way that didn't feel forced. Michael stared at her. Langford raised an eyebrow. Well, he said quietly, she certainly knows how to make an entrance. Victoria walked toward Michael with a gentle smile. You look nervous, she teased. Michael shook his head. No, you just look. That he stopped himself. Victoria laughed. Just say it. Michael smiled faintly. You look amazing. Victoria blushed slightly. Thank you. For a moment, it felt like old times again. But that moment didn't last long. Across the room, a tall woman approached. She moved with quiet confidence, sharp eyes. Expensive designer dress. Her presence commanded attention. Michael Anderson, she said with a polite smile. Michael turned. Ah, Claire. Victoria noticed the familiarity immediately. Claire extended her hand. I'm Claire Donovan. I sit on the advisory board. Victoria shook her hand. Victoria? Claire smiled pleasantly. I've heard about you. Victoria returned the smile. I hope only good things. Claire laughed softly. Of course. But something about the tone felt calculated. Claire turned back to Michael. The investors are asking for you. Michael nodded. I'll be right there. Claire looked at Victoria again. You must be proud of him. Victoria nodded. I am. Claire tilted her head slightly. Building a company like this requires a certain kind of focus. Victoria didn't respond. Claire continued smoothly. Many relationships struggle under that pressure. Victoria kept her voice calm. Some relationships are stronger than that. Claire smiled again. Perhaps. Then she walked away. Victoria watched her go. Who was that? She asked. Michael rubbed the back of his neck. She's an advisor to the board. Victoria raised an eyebrow. She seems very interested in your company. Michael shrugged. She's just doing her job. Victoria said nothing. But something about Claire Donovan made her uneasy. The evening continued. Michael was constantly pulled away by investors, business partners, reporters. Victoria wandered through the ballroom mostly alone. She overheard conversations. Michael Anderson is the future of this industry. I heard the company valuation just crossed $500 million. Brilliant young CEO. Victoria smiled politely whenever someone spoke to her, but something strange kept happening. Many people asked her the same question. So what do you do? When she explained that she helped Michael build the early business plans, most people responded with polite nods, but their interest quickly faded. To them, she was simply Michael Anderson's fiancée, nothing more. Later that evening, Victoria stepped outside onto the balcony for some fresh air. The cool night breeze brushed her face. The city stretched endlessly below. Michael joined her a few minutes later. You disappeared, he said. Victoria smiled softly. I needed a break. Michael leaned on the railing beside her. This event is exhausting. Victoria nodded. I can tell. For a moment, they stood quietly together, just like the old days. Then Victoria spoke. Claire seems close to the board. Michael stiffened slightly. She's influential. Victoria glanced at him. She seems close to you too. Michael frowned. Victoria, I'm not accusing you of anything, she said calmly. Michael sighed. She's just helping the company grow. Victoria looked at the glowing skyline. I hope that's all she's helping with. Michael turned toward her. What's that supposed to mean? Victoria met his eyes. It means I can feel you changing. Michael's jaw tightened. I'm doing what's necessary for the company. Victoria's voice softened. And what about what's necessary for us? Michael looked away. The silence between them returned. But this time, it felt heavier, more fragile. Inside the ballroom, Claire Donovan watched them through the glass doors. Richard Langford stood beside her. Interesting couple, Langford said quietly. Claire nodded. Very. Langford sipped his drink. How long do you think she lasts? Claire smiled faintly. Not long. Back on the balcony, Victoria reached for Michael's hand. But this time, Michael didn't notice. He was staring out at the skyline. The same skyline they once dreamed about together. Only now, Michael Anderson was starting to believe he belonged to a different world. And Victoria was beginning to feel like she was slowly being pushed out of it. The morning after the gala felt strangely quiet. Sunlight streamed through the massive windows of the penthouse, spilling across the polished floors and modern furniture. Victoria stood in the kitchen holding a mug of coffee she hadn't touched. Her mind kept returning to the previous night. The whispers, the curious looks, Claire Donovan's confident smile, and the way Michael had slowly drifted away during the event like she was just another guest. Michael walked in a few minutes later, already dressed for work. You're up early, he said. Victoria nodded. Couldn't sleep. Michael grabbed his briefcase. I have a board meeting this morning. Victoria hesitated. Michael, can we talk for a minute? Michael glanced at his watch. I'm running late. It won't take long. Michael sighed but sat down at the table. Victoria sat across from him. Her voice was calm, but her eyes held something deeper. Do you remember the night we started planning the company? Michael nodded slowly. Of course. Victoria smiled faintly. We had instant noodles for dinner. Michael chuckled, and the heater barely worked. Victoria leaned back slightly. You told me you were terrified no one would believe in your idea. Michael said nothing. Victoria continued softly. And I told you it didn't matter. Michael looked down at the table. You believed in me. I still do. Michael nodded quietly, but Victoria could see the distance in his eyes again. So she asked the question that had been growing in her heart. Do you still believe in us? Michael didn't answer right away. Instead, he rubbed his temples. Victoria, things are complicated right now. Victoria felt her chest tighten. Complicated how? Michael stood up. The company is entering a new stage. And that means what? Michael exhaled slowly. It means I have responsibilities now. Victoria stood too. You've always had responsibilities. That's different. Victoria's voice rose slightly. How is it different? Michael finally looked at her. Because now there are hundreds of employees depending on me. Victoria stared at him. And I was depending on you first. Michael didn't respond. Victoria felt a wave of frustration rising. I gave you everything I had, Michael. I know. My savings. I know. My time. I know. My belief in you. Michael looked away again. Victoria's voice softened. Then why does it feel like you're slowly pushing me out of your life? Michael didn't answer, and that silence felt louder than anything he could have said. After Michael left for work, Victoria wandered through the quiet penthouse. The place felt beautiful, but also strangely empty. She walked into Michael's home office. She rarely entered the room. It was his space, but something pulled her inside today. The desk was covered with documents, reports, financial projections, investor briefings. Victoria sat down and glanced at the papers absent-mindedly. Then she noticed something unusual, a document labeled, Equity Distribution, Anderson Technologies. Victoria frowned. She scanned the page quickly. Michael Anderson, 52%. Investment Partners, 38%. Board Equity Pool, 8%. Remaining shares, 2%. Victoria blinked. She looked again. Her name wasn't anywhere on the document. Not even a single percentage. Her heart skipped. That couldn't be right. She began searching through the rest of the paperwork. More contracts. More agreements. And then she found something that made her stomach drop. The original investment contract. Her $10,000. It wasn't listed as an equity investment. It was listed as a personal loan to Michael Anderson. Victoria sat frozen. A loan. Not ownership. Not partnership. A loan, which meant legally she owned nothing. Not the company. Not the success she helped create. Nothing. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the document back on the desk. Michael, she whispered. Later that afternoon, Michael sat in the boardroom with several investors. Claire Donovan sat near the head of the table. The meeting had been intense. Revenue projections, expansion plans, international partnerships. Finally, Richard Langford leaned back in his chair. The company is doing extremely well, he said. Michael nodded. But growth at this level attracts attention. Claire spoke next. Competitors are watching us closely. Michael crossed his arms. We're ready for competition. Langford smiled slightly. That's not the concern. Michael frowned. Then what is? Langford glanced at Claire. Claire answered calmly. Public perception. Michael felt a familiar tension rising. What about it? Claire folded her hands. You're becoming a public figure now, Michael. Michael waited. Public figures require a carefully managed image. Michael already knew where this conversation was going. My relationship isn't part of the company's strategy. Claire tilted her head slightly. Everything about a CEO becomes part of the company's image. Michael said nothing. Langford leaned forward. We're not asking you to make any decisions today. Michael remained silent, but the message was clear. That evening, Victoria sat alone on the balcony again. The city lights shimmered below like scattered diamonds. Michael stepped outside after arriving home. You're quiet tonight, he said. Victoria looked at him calmly. I went into your office today. Michael stiffened slightly. Oh, Victoria held up the document she had found. Why is my investment listed as a loan? Michael froze. For a moment, he didn't speak. Victoria's voice trembled slightly. Why am I not listed as a shareholder? Michael rubbed his forehead. Victoria, it was just simpler legally. Simpler for who? For the company. Victoria laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. For the company. Michael avoided her eyes. It didn't matter back then. Victoria stared at him in disbelief. It mattered to me. Michael sighed. You still have the money. Victoria shook her head slowly. You don't understand. Her voice broke slightly. I never wanted the money back. Michael looked confused. Then what did you want? Victoria's eyes filled with tears. I wanted to build something with you. The silence between them felt unbearable. And for the first time, Michael Anderson didn't know how to answer. The city that once worshipped Michael Anderson was beginning to whisper. From the outside, everything still looked perfect. His towering office building, luxury cars lined up at the entrance, and the expensive suits he wore to every meeting. But inside the company, cracks were spreading fast. And the person quietly pulling the threads behind the curtain was Victoria, not out of revenge, out of truth. For years, Michael had told the world that he built the empire himself. Investors believed it. The media repeated it. Even business magazines printed his face on their covers with titles like The Self-Made Visionary. But Victoria had kept records of everything. Every idea. Every business plan. Every late night where she stayed awake while Michael slept. She had never imagined she would need proof. Yet now, those documents sat neatly organized in a folder on her desk. Across town, Michael was walking into the most important board meeting of his career. He expected applause. Instead, he walked into silence. The board members sat stiffly around the table. No one smiled. Michael frowned slightly. "Good morning, everyone." No response. At the head of the table, the chairman slowly folded his hands. "Michael, we need to discuss something." Michael leaned back confidently. "Of course. If this is about the expansion deal, I've already prepared the presentation. It's not about expansion." The room felt colder. The chairman slid a document across the table. Michael glanced at it casually at first. Then his expression changed. His eyes scanned the page again and again. These are internal documents," he said slowly. "They are," the chairman replied. "And they clearly show that the company's original strategy, the investment model, and even the breakthrough product idea were created by someone else." Michael's jaw tightened. "Where did you get this?" The chairman's answer was calm. "Victoria." The name landed like thunder. Michael stood abruptly. "She's lying." No one reacted. Another board member spoke. "She didn't just bring claims. She brought proof, emails, early drafts, voice recordings from strategy meetings." Michael felt something he hadn't felt in years: fear. The chairman leaned forward. "We've also learned that you removed her from the company without legal review and transferred intellectual rights under your personal ownership." Michael's voice rose. "That company is mine." A third board member shook his head. "No, Michael. It appears it never was." Silence filled the room. The chairman slid one final document toward him. "Effective immediately, the board is launching a formal investigation." Michael stared at the paper. "Investigation? For what?" The chairman didn't blink. "Corporate fraud." For the first time in years, Michael Anderson had no words. Across the city, Victoria sat quietly in a small cafe. The sunlight warmed the window beside her, and the noise of the street felt strangely peaceful. She wasn't celebrating. She was breathing. For months, she had wondered if exposing the truth would destroy her. Instead, it felt like freedom. Her phone buzzed on the table. A news notification appeared. "Breaking. Investigation launched into tech CEO Michael Anderson." Victoria looked at the headline for a long moment. Memories flashed through her mind. The early days, the tiny apartment, the dreams they had once shared. Back when Michael used to say, "We're building this together." She sighed softly. "Maybe we were," she whispered. But power had changed him. Or maybe it had simply revealed who he really was. Her phone buzzed again. Another headline appeared. "Sources claim former partner Victoria holds key evidence." Victoria turned the phone face down. She didn't want attention. She only wanted the truth to stand. Across town, reporters were already gathering outside Michael's office building. Employees whispered in hallways. Investors began calling their lawyers, and the empire Michael had proudly claimed as his own was starting to shake. But the greatest shock was still waiting. Because Victoria hadn't revealed everything yet, she reached into her bag and pulled out one last envelope. Inside it was a document Michael had completely forgotten about. The original company registration papers, signed years ago, back when the company was nothing more than an idea and a borrowed laptop. At the bottom of the page were two names: Victoria Hayes, founder; Michael Anderson, partner. Victoria smiled faintly. The truth had a strange way of returning, no matter how long it was buried. She finished her coffee, stood up, and stepped out into the sunlight. Some empires rise with lies, but the strongest ones are rebuilt with truth. And Victoria was just getting started. The news spread faster than anyone expected. By the next morning, every major business network was talking about Michael Anderson. His face appeared on television screens across the country. Headlines scrolled beneath his image: "Billionaire CEO under investigation." "Former partner claims company was built on her ideas." For years, Michael had controlled the story. Now the story was controlling him. Inside his luxury penthouse, Michael paced back and forth like a trapped animal. His phone kept ringing. Lawyers, investors, reporters. He ignored most of them. Finally, he answered one call. His lawyer's voice came through immediately. "Michael, we have a serious situation." Michael's jaw tightened. "I already know that." "Fix it." There was a long pause. "It may not be that simple." Michael stopped walking. "What do you mean?" "The evidence Victoria submitted is strong. Emails, documents, timestamps. They all show she created the company's core strategy years before investors got involved. Michael clenched his fists. She worked for me. No, the lawyer replied carefully. From what we're seeing, you worked with her. The words felt like a slap. Michael ended the call without another word. For the first time since becoming rich, he felt powerless. He walked toward the giant window overlooking the city. Everything he owned was out there: his towers, his offices, his reputation. And yet somehow it all felt like it was slipping through his fingers. Across the city, Victoria sat in a quiet conference room. This time she wasn't alone. 3 lawyers sat across from her, carefully reviewing the documents she had brought. One of them looked up. Victoria, if these registration papers are authentic, this changes everything. Victoria nodded. They are. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. This document lists you as the primary founder of the company. Michael Anderson is listed as a partner, not the sole owner. Victoria folded her hands calmly. That's how it started. Another lawyer leaned forward. Why didn't you fight for this earlier? Victoria was silent for a moment. Then she answered honestly. Because I believed in him. Years ago, when they had signed that document, the company was nothing more than a dream. Victoria had created the business model. Michael had handled the networking. Together, they had convinced their first investors. Back then, they trusted each other completely. But when the company started making millions, everything changed. Michael slowly pushed her out of meetings, then out of decisions. Eventually, out of the company itself, he told everyone she had chosen to step away. The truth was far different. She had been erased, until now. Meanwhile, Michael's office building was surrounded by reporters. Cameras flashed as executives rushed inside. Employees whispered nervously in the lobby. Inside the boardroom, the directors were already arguing. This investigation could destroy the company. It's already damaging the stock. We should suspend Michael immediately. The chairman raised his hand. Enough. The room fell silent. We built this company on reputation. If the public believes our CEO stole the foundation of the business, we have no credibility. One board member spoke carefully. Victoria Hayes might actually be the rightful founder. The room went quiet again. The chairman sighed. Then we need to prepare for that possibility. Late that evening, Michael finally left his penthouse. He drove through the city without a destination. Every billboard, every building, every restaurant reminded him of the empire he had built, or at least the empire he had claimed. Eventually, he stopped the car. It was an old neighborhood cafe, the same place where he and Victoria used to meet during the early days of the company, back when they had nothing but ambition. Michael sat in the car for a long time, staring at the entrance. He hadn't thought about those days in years. Back then, Victoria was the one with the ideas. She would scribble business plans on napkins while explaining future strategies. Michael used to laugh and say, "You think too big." And she would smile. "Someone has to." Michael looked down at the steering wheel. For the first time in years, guilt crept into his mind. Not because he was being investigated, but because deep down, he knew the truth. Victoria had built the foundation. He had simply taken the credit, and now the world was starting to see it. Back at her apartment, Victoria turned off the television. Another news panel had just finished debating the scandal. Some people called her brave. Others called her opportunistic. But Victoria didn't care about opinions anymore. She cared about justice. Her phone buzzed again. This time, the message was different. It was from someone she hadn't heard from in years, Michael Anderson. She stared at the screen. The message was short. "We need to talk." Victoria slowly put the phone down. For years, she had waited for Michael to acknowledge the truth. Now he wanted a conversation. But things were no longer the same. Because the man who once controlled everything was finally running out of power, and Victoria was no longer the woman he could silence. Victoria stared at the message from Michael Anderson for a long time. "We need to talk." 2 years ago, those words would have meant everything to her. Now, they meant something very different. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she placed the phone on the table and walked toward the window of her apartment. The city lights flickered in the distance, the same city where she had once built a dream with Michael, a dream he later claimed as his own. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Michael. "Please." That single word surprised her. Michael was never the type to beg. Victoria closed her eyes for a moment, thinking carefully. Finally, she picked up the phone and replied. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. The old cafe." She hit send. For the first time in years, they would face each other again. The next morning, The cafe was quiet. Sunlight poured through the large windows, lighting the small wooden tables inside. It was the same place where Victoria and Michael had once spent hours discussing ideas, sketching plans, and imagining a future neither of them had yet earned. Victoria arrived first. She sat at a corner table and ordered coffee. 10 minutes later, the door opened. Michael Anderson walked in. But he didn't look like the confident billionaire the world knew. His suit was still expensive, but his expression was tired. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes. He looked around the cafe. When his eyes found Victoria, he froze for a moment. Then he slowly walked toward her table. Victoria remained calm. "Sit down," she said. Michael sat across from her. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Michael broke the silence. "You look well." Victoria didn't smile. "What do you want, Michael?" He exhaled slowly. "I want this to stop." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "This?" "The investigation. The media circus. The board turning against me." Victoria leaned back slightly. "You mean the truth?" Michael's jaw tightened. "You didn't have to do it like this." Victoria almost laughed. "Like what?" "Publicly." Her voice became colder. "You removed me from the company I helped build." Michael looked down. "That was business." "No," Victoria said firmly. "That was betrayal." The word hung in the air. Michael ran a hand through his hair. "Victoria, we were both young. The company was growing fast. Investors trusted me to lead it. And you decided the easiest way to lead it was to erase me." Michael didn't answer, because he knew it was true. After a long silence, he leaned forward. "What do you want?" Victoria folded her hands calmly. "I want the truth." Michael frowned. "You already have that." "No," she replied quietly. "The world doesn't." Michael looked confused. Victoria pulled a document from her bag and slid it across the table. Michael looked down. His eyes widened slightly. It was the original company registration paper, the one he had signed years ago. At the bottom were the two names that started everything. Victoria Hayes, founder; Michael Anderson, partner. Michael swallowed. "I thought this was lost." Victoria shook her head. "I kept everything." Michael stared at the paper like it was a ghost from the past. "This could destroy me," he whispered. Victoria looked at him carefully. "No, your actions did that." Michael's voice became quieter. "If this goes public, the board will remove me. Investors will leave. Everything I built. Everything we built," Victoria corrected. Michael fell silent again. For the first time in years, he looked like the man she used to know. Not the arrogant CEO, just Michael. The man who once believed in her ideas. He finally spoke again. "What do you want me to do?" Victoria's answer came without hesitation. "Tell the truth." Michael looked shocked. "You think admitting this will fix things?" "No," she said honestly. "It will probably destroy your reputation." "Then why would I do it?" Victoria's voice softened slightly. "Because it's the first honest thing you'll have done in years." Michael stared at the table. His entire career had been built on power, reputation, and control. Admitting the truth meant losing all of that. But refusing it might cost him even more. After a long moment, he looked back at Victoria. "You're serious?" She nodded. "Yes." Michael leaned back slowly in his chair. "You know what the media will do with this?" "Yes. They'll say I stole the company." Victoria met his eyes. "Didn't you?" Michael had no answer. The silence between them felt heavier than any argument. Finally, Michael stood up. "I need time." Victoria didn't stop him. As he walked toward the door, he paused. Then he looked back at her. "Victoria, did you ever hate me?" She thought about the question carefully. Then she answered truthfully. "No." Michael looked surprised. "I was just disappointed." He nodded slowly. Then he left the cafe. Victoria watched him disappear into the busy street outside. For years, Michael Anderson had controlled the narrative. But now the next chapter of the story was his to choose: tell the truth, or lose everything trying to hide it. 2 days later, the city woke to headlines that would shake the business world. Michael Anderson admits truth. Victoria Hayes is founder of Anderson Technologies. Billionaire CEO steps aside after partner exposes original ownership. The story spread like wildfire. News anchors debated, social media exploded, and investors called emergency meetings. But through it all, Victoria stayed calm. She didn't want fame. She wanted justice. And now the truth was finally out. Michael sat in his now empty penthouse, staring at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The empire he had built, The image he had curated, the power he had clung to, it all felt different now. Not destroyed, but reset. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Victoria stepped in, carrying a folder of documents with the company's updated structure. "Michael," she said gently, "it's done." Michael nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. I, I didn't think I'd have the courage to do the right thing." "You had the courage all along," Victoria replied softly. "You just had to remember who you were before the money, before the power. The man I believed in." Michael lowered his gaze. "I was so afraid of losing everything that I almost lost what mattered most." Victoria stepped closer. "You didn't. You're still here. And so am I." Michael looked up, meeting her eyes. For the first time in years, he didn't see a woman he had used or betrayed. He saw the partner, the equal, the person who had built everything with him. "Victoria," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I can't undo the past, but I want to make things right." "You already started," she said, a small smile forming. Michael took her hands in his. "I want to rebuild not just the company, but us." Victoria studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "We'll do it together." The sunlight from the penthouse windows caught her eyes, making them glimmer with hope. Michael felt a warmth he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the warmth of power or money. It was trust, respect, love. At the company headquarters, a new era began. Victoria's name officially appeared as founder on all records. Michael retained his position as partner and CEO, but with a newfound humility. Investors were impressed, not by the scandal, but by their honesty and resilience. Employees celebrated quietly. The company felt alive again, not as a machine for profit, but as a creation nurtured by vision and collaboration. Michael and Victoria worked side by side, walking into boardrooms together, planning strategies, and dreaming again. Only now, the dreams belonged to both of them. One evening, Michael and Victoria stood on the balcony of their office floor, looking over the city. "Do you remember the first night we celebrated our little success with instant noodles?" Michael asked. Victoria laughed softly. "How could I forget? You said we were rich in ideas, not money." Michael smiled. "We were both right." Victoria rested her head on his shoulder. "We're still building. Just together this time." Michael kissed the top of her head gently. Together. And as the city lights twinkled below them, Michael finally understood that success without trust, without love, without the person who believed in him first, meant nothing. They had rebuilt more than a company. They had rebuilt their bond, their dreams, their lives. And this time, nothing, not power, not ambition, not fear, could break them again. Do you think success changes people, or does it simply reveal who they truly are? Share your thoughts and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because I love seeing how far these stories travel around the world. New emotional and powerful stories are waiting for you, and you definitely don't want to miss the next one.